yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio reserves his time. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds. The distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Espaillat.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, today I cast my vote for the second time to impeach Donald J. Trump. He is unfit to hold office. He summons and dispatches mob to kidnap and hurt many of us. He is unfit to hold office. He summons and dispatches mob to assassinate Vice President Pence, to assassinate Speaker Pelosi. He is unfit to hold office. He summons and dispatches a mob that waved the racist Confederate flag and assaulted this Capitol, resulting in the death of 5 Americans, including 2 Capitol police officers. He is unfit to hold office.
The gentleman's time has expired.
We must
The
impeach
gentleman's time
now.
has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio continues to reserve. The gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Garcia.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in the strongest possible support for the impeachment of Donald J. Trump. When Trump made a last desperate attempt to steal the presidency, to reject the will of the people by encouraging insurrection, he became the first president to incite an attempted overthrow of the institutions he is sworn to protect. That is a horrifying first, and his actions necessitate another. He should be the first president impeached and removed from office in the history of our country. I voted to impeach him once, and I'm ready to do it again. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
One more, and then we'll go to you.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio continues to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Garcia.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, this president took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. Instead, he has chosen to betray and attack our sacred democracy. This president violated his oath. He abused the power of his office, attempted to betray the will of the American people, and incited insurrection against this very House. During the last impeachment trial, I reminded all Americans that democracy is a gift that each generation gives to the next. We must do all to protect it. For our children and our future, we must impeach him. Thank you.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stubbe.
The gentleman's yielding 2 minutes, is that correct?
2 minutes.
2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. For 3 years, Democratic members of this body and the mainstream media lied to the American people that the Trump campaign colluded and conspired with Russia. For years, after an exhaustive investigation, it was found that there was no evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. Should Democratic members of this body resign for lying to the American people repeatedly and sowing division and dissension all across America? And it was all a lie. You have brought one article of impeachment to the floor, and your one allegation alleges, and I quote, Donald John Trump engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors by inciting violence against the government of the United States. In D.C., it's a crime to, quote, intentionally or recklessly act in such a manner to cause another person to be in reasonable fear and to incite or provoke violence when there's a likelihood that such violence will ensue. There was no language in the president's speech that incited or provoked violence. In fact, at around the 18-minute mark, he stated, and quote, peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. You may think that he's inciting violence because he believes there was election fraud. That's his opinion, and he's entitled to that opinion, just like all of you were entitled to your false and fraudulent opinion that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. The legal elements of incitement are based on the Supreme Court case Brandenburg v. Ohio, in which the Supreme Court set the standard for speech that could be prosecuted without violating the First Amendment. Brandenburg's speech called for violence against groups of Americans, and the court found that Brandenburg's comments were not directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action. The court found that it was protected speech, and he was calling for violence. That's the current law of the land. The president didn't even mention violence last Wednesday, much less provoke or incite it. There was no crime committed and therefore no basis for impeachment, as you need a high crime or misdemeanor for a basis. You have created a mockery out of the impeachment process, and I urge all my colleagues to stand against it and fight the latest fraud being perpetrated against the American people by the radical left.
The gentleman
Nice
yields
job.
back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve.
Yes.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Hursford.
The gentleman from Nevada is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the article of impeachment. Last Wednesday's events were not just a breach of a building, but a breach of our democracy, a threat to our republic and to who we are as Americans. Donald Trump incited insurrection against America and attempted to overturn the will of the people. We must send a clear message that committing sedition disqualifies a president from serving another day in office. I urge this body to vote for impeachment. I will. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio continues to reserve.
Madam
The
Speaker, I
gentleman
now
from New
yield
York-
30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan.
The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, last evening an 11-year-old girl joined our telephone town hall. Her question shook me to my core. She was worried about the future of this great nation, and I am too. That is why I must move forward with impeachment of this president. He has endangered this nation. He has betrayed his oath. I do this now for all of us, for our Constitution and for this republic. I do this to tell the world that this great democracy will stand and no one is above the law. And I do this for our future generations. I urge us all to unite and to vote yes on impeachment. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, history is watching and saving the receipts. Today, my colleagues across the aisle must choose which side of a very bright line they want to be recorded on for all time. On one side, lies, sedition, inciting and supporting insurrection, and domestic terrorism. The other side, your oath of office, the Constitution, democracy, decency. There is no middle ground. Today we make history forever. So choose well. A vote to impeach Donald Trump means years from now you can look your grandchildren in the eye and say, I did the right thing.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman
back.
from New York continues to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
We reserve, Madam
The
Speaker.
gentleman continues to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Jacobs.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, the response to political violence must always be accountability. Without accountability, more violence will follow. I learned that working at the United Nations and the State Department in conflict settings around the world, and the United States Congress is now a conflict setting. A violent mob threatened our lives in this chamber and almost succeeded, incited by the president who broadcasted lies about the outcome of our election. We must hold this president accountable. It's the only way to protect our democracy. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from New York continues to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm certain that every member of Congress would say that if they had been in Congress when John Lewis walked across that Edmund Pettus Bridge and the Civil Rights Act was passed, that they would have stood on the right side of history. Well, Madam Speaker, today we're going to see exactly what side of history you all are going to be on. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York continues to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Cawthorn.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, today represents a unique opportunity in our nation's history. An opportunity to put America first, to put her people first. Today is a moment for members of Congress to put aside partisan politicking and place people over power. I urge my colleagues to vote against this divisive impeachment and realize that dividing America will not save this republic. I urge my colleagues to not simply vote for what feels good. Of course, it feels good for the Democrats to have a united constituency for a few more days. But I was elected to come here and vote for things that actually do good, to bring much needed help to the American people. I am willing to take the first step and extend my hand across the aisle to say, vote against impeachment, vote in favor of a unified nation, and I will forsake partisanship and work with you, no matter who you are or what party you come from. Madam Speaker, I urge that we all vote to finally put America first. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, now you have 30 seconds to a new member of the House and a new member of the Judiciary Committee. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Jones.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the impeachment of Donald J. Trump, the disgraced, defeated President of the United States. There must be consequences for last week's treason and sedition. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Donald Trumps in today's Republican Party aim to run for higher office, and we must send a message that no one in the United States of America is above the law. The world is watching, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Kildee.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, 1 week ago, the President of the United States incited a deadly attack on the United States Capitol while a couple of dozen members of this House and I covered ourselves in that gallery away from the Trump mob. 5 dead, including Capitol Police. If inciting an insurrection does not warrant impeachment, nothing does. I took an oath to uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Today, I vote to uphold my oath.
The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve his time. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Excuse me, Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Wisconsin.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today to strongly object to the articles of impeachment proposed against President Trump, which make the preposterous claim that President Trump wanted or expected the riots that took place last week. He clearly said he wanted peaceful and patriotic demonstration. He did say he wanted people to fight like hell or we're not going to have a country anymore, but that's obviously standard hyperbole and was not meant to aim at physical fights. But what is offensive is what you are saying and inflammatory about the tens of thousands of peaceful protesters who were there last week, as well as the tens of millions of people they represent. You don't understand why they were here. They're scared to death we're going to go back to the days without Donald Trump of hundreds of thousands of people crossing this border every month. They're scared to death nobody's going to keep our manufacturing here. They're scared to death that nobody else will fight the cancel culture as we head towards an era when some things can't be said. They're scared to death that a majority party got here by teaming up with Black Lives Matter, a bunch of founded by Marxists and that dislike a family.
The gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve.
Reserve.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi.
The gentleman from California is recognized.